When he got on a plane in Portland, Oregon last night, he was just another passenger who gave his name as D.A. Cooper. But today, after hijacking a Northwest Airlines jet, ransoming the passengers in Seattle, then making a getaway by parachute somewhere between there and Reno, Nevada, the description on one wire service, master criminal. Bill Curtis reports.
36 passengers got off the jetliner in Seattle last night, left aboard 4 crew members and the hijacker, dressed in a business suit demanding $200,000 and carrying a plain briefcase which he told the crew held explosives. With the full ransom collected from Seattle banks and 4 parachutes aboard, the plane headed for Reno. It took 3.5 hours, slow for a jet, but the hijacker had given detailed flight instructions. The rear stairwell was open all the way. It arrived at Reno in shreds. The crew, here being debriefed by the FBI, was told to fly low over Oregon's flatlands with the flaps down. The speed dropped to 200 miles per hour. Somewhere, the hijacker parachuted away with the money. The crew had little to say.
We gave the information to the authorities, and we just don't want to discuss it any further.
Have you been told by the FBI not to discuss?
No, they handle their investigation, and my company would rather have it released through them.
Tina, were you with the rest of the crew during the flight after you left the ground the last time?
Yes, I went up to the cockpit.
None of you were within sight of the hijacker, right?
Right. We already talked about it, and the captain,
How did you surmise that he was not on the plane when he landed in Reno?
Well, a search was made of the plane immediately after landing.
As we understood it, he could have gotten off as the plane taxied before it came up here. How did the crew know he wasn't on when it touched ground?
No way. The crew couldn't know that, but we had the airport covered.
Are the authorities now searching for...
Snow covers the mountains in Northern California and Nevada, a hostile terrain for any parachute drop, especially at night. Police believe he left the 727 in the flatlands of Oregon or Washington, but they are still looking in 4 states, even around the airport. Authorities began their search here, thinking the hijacker may have jumped off at the end of the runway as the plane touched down. But the problem is more complex. A daring parachute escape from a flying 727 somewhere between Reno and Seattle, Washington. Bill Curtis, CBS News, Reno.
The way in which he carried out his crime was coldly calculated. He reinforced his demands by opening a briefcase and showing the stewardess what appeared to be a bomb. The stewardess reported directly to the captain, who then communicated the skyjacker's demands to the airlines and the FAA. Ralph Himmelsbach, an FBI veteran with 29 years service, was notified of a skyjacking in progress. Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle normally takes 36 minutes. This day, it would last more than 2 hours. 2 of the passengers on that flight were Richard and Barbara Simmons.
Well, they had asked us to remain in our seats, and of course, after 2 hours in the air, I felt an urge to go back to the men's restroom and got up and walked down the aisle and noticed the expression of the stewardess was rather horrified. She glanced first at me walking up the aisle, and then at B.B. Cooper and at the handbag by his side, and then back at me again as if, why are you doing what you're doing? But as I walked past her into the men's room, he turned around and looked very intently at me, and I got a pretty good look. I thought it rather strange that he was that interested in me. And so I got a pretty good impression of him. He was very alert and very much in command of the situation. He knew what was going on, and he was watching carefully every move of every passenger.
Meanwhile, law enforcement officers and airline officials were now preparing to meet Cooper's demands. Earl Cossey, a parachutist with 16 years experience and 3,200 jumps to his credit, was asked to supply the 4 parachutes Cooper wanted. By 3:34, Captain Robert Scott was circling the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport while airline officials collected the $200,000 from a group of Seattle banks. posse was quickly preparing the parachutes to be delivered to Cooper. By mistake, one was a ground training chute with its panels sewn shut, thus making it defective. At FBI headquarters, a furious effort was being made to record each serial number on the 10,000 $20 bills that would comprise the ransom demanded by Cooper. The plane finally landed in Seattle at 5:46 p.m. It was brought to a remote area of the runway.
When we finally did land, we landed way off in the far end of the field, which I felt was just a way that showed that he had engineered things so that there was just no possible thing that could have gotten in his way. He allowed the passengers to be unloaded, but kept them grouped out on the airport for close to 45 minutes in the wind and the cold and the rain. And a car met the airplane with the parachute and the money, and we were rumored that that was there. And but none of us were allowed to leave until that had all taken place, and then we were allowed slowly to walk across the airfield.
The flight crew and Cooper remained aboard the aircraft. At 7:36 p.m., the plane, refueled and prepared for flight, headed south in low clouds, wind, and showers. Cooper demanded that the landing gear be kept down, and displaying basic flight knowledge, he also ordered the wing flaps set at 15 degrees to slow the jet's speed. The Air Force scrambled jet fighters from McCord Air Force Base near Tacoma to follow the plane from a safe distance. Trying to find and follow a low-flying 727, even with radar vectors, is like trying to find the proverbial needle in a haystack. About 20 minutes later, Cooper ordered the entire crew to stay locked in the front of the plane. At 8:11 p.m., the crew felt a sudden change in the pressure throughout the plane. Because of the inclement weather, no one, including the Air Force jets, ever saw Cooper jump or a chute open. The territory in which Cooper jumped was to be searched by planes, helicopters, and trackers on foot. Both Washington and Oregon possess some of the most impenetrable forests in the country. That Cooper would pick these areas may provide clues to his identity. For the present, all we have is an artist's rendering of his face. Who was Cooper? Why has this skyjacking bedeviled investigators for so long? We will have to retrace the crime and analyze the incredibly complex strategy Cooper might have plotted. Meteorologists, expert parachutists, and the crew of Flight 305 were all questioned. That data and flight log information were fed into FBI computers. The FBI concluded that Cooper jumped in a 4-by-6 mile area near Merwin Dam. Merwin Dam, 313 feet high and 1,250 feet wide. It holds back the Lewis River in order to create Lake Merwin. When Cooper jumped, the dam was crowned with a series of brilliant lights. If Cooper could have caught some glimpse through the cloud layers, he would have been provided with an unmistakable landmark. He would have known exactly where he was. Les Nelson, sheriff of Cowlitz County, the supposed Cooper landing site, assisted FBI agents in coordinating the search by procuring a helicopter from Weyerhaeuser Paper Company in Longview, Washington.
We searched the area up the Lewis River to the south into Clark County and north side of into Cowlitz County and made several passes. We ran for several days there with an intensified search initially with patrol cars and some foot patrol, but basically just the overflight of both fixed wing and helicopters. We have had experience in the past with downed aircraft searching for different individuals, and we have had comparatively good success of spotting people from the air who were lost or incidents where we've had plane crashes. It's my belief that had this man made a safe jump and had pulled the ripcord on that chute and it had blossomed out, that we would have easily have spotted it from the air.
But if the chute caught in the trees and hung vertically, the chances for finding Cooper would have been minuscule. Searchers would have been looking for a 1 square foot white splotch in the more than 24 square miles they were searching. Cooper could not have landed in a more inhospitable place. The landscape is laced with bogs and thickets. Is it possible that just such a setting helped Cooper instead of hindering him? Frank Heil is a survival school expert who trains men working on the Alaskan pipeline. He is convinced that given the proper background, Cooper could easily survive in the wilderness.
I like to feel that with the clothing that I have on my back and the tools of survival that I carry in my pocket, that I could live indefinitely out here. Now, these tools of survival can be, of course, concealed in your pockets. No one would even know that you had them, and maybe this is what Cooper did. This area that supposedly Cooper came down in would be, in my way of thinking, an ideal area. I'd select it myself.
La Center, Washington. Population 420. A tiny farming community nestled in a pine forest. It and another town, Ariel, were the closest to the supposed drop site. On the night of November 24th, 1971, Cooper could have passed through the town unnoticed because everyone had crammed into the Evangelical Free Church to attend the wedding of their popular high school music teacher. While it is most likely that Cooper was not from southwestern Washington, it is possible that he knew the area and that he knew about the wedding. One highly questionable report concerns a light plane. People in this area claim that a small plane intermittently crisscrossed the skies over lonely farm fields near Ariel and La Center for a week preceding Cooper's jump, sometimes rendezvousing with a car. The mystery of who Cooper is may be unlocked by the man totally dedicated to finding the skyjacker. Ralph Himmelsbach, the FBI agent, still searches the area in his own plane. He believes Cooper was incapable of the intricate planning needed for the skyjacking.
I think he was a desperate man, possibly had a criminal background. He was probably not very well educated. He may have been in a service capacity. He was wearing the type of clothing that would be worn by perhaps a bartender or a waiter. We don't know who he was, where he came from, or where he went.
We may learn more about Cooper from the type of chute he chose. Earl Cossey, demonstrating the normal freestyle parachute, explains.
The type of parachute that D.B. Cooper used was a 28-foot parachute in a military-type container. And this type of container and harness would be very, very difficult as far as finding the ripcord goes. In selecting this type of parachute, it would seem that he had some military background. He would encounter numerous problems. Number one, as he exited the airplane, he's likely to go unstable, which would also cause him some problems in reaching and locating and finding his ripcord, aside from the fact that it was night. Since it's rainy and windy, if he got the parachute open, then the problems of his landing would come up. I'm just sure if he pulled the ripcord, he made it.
The sketchy evidence leads us to a peculiar but quite plausible conclusion. During the Vietnam War, 727s were extensively used. They turned up at both civilian and military terminals, carrying supplies and personnel. The 727 pilots were drawn from both Air Force and civilian sources. Cooper could have been any one of these pilots. If so, he would have had a familiarity with military parachutes and survival techniques.
The evidence suggests that Cooper must have had military experience to be able to plan and successfully execute such a crime. Some experts consider this theory irrelevant, insisting that Cooper never even survived his jump. 7 years after Cooper committed the first American skyjacking, a scrap of evidence of his possible survival was found.
Carol Hicks is a hunter and woodsman.
While hunting with my hunting partner, I took off chasing a herd of elk. And as I was going through the woods, chasing these elk, which I never saw, of course, I was going through the brush, and lo and behold, there this piece of plastic was with some writing on it. I noticed that it was an emergency exit plaque. Of course, we collect the trash and stuff that we find in the woods, so I folded it up and put it in my pocket. The thought wasn't there about Cooper's plane, but I knew it was off an emergency exit off of the plane. I returned to where we started. While emptying my pockets into a trash container there, why, I remembered this was in my uppermost pocket, and I showed it to my hunting partner. And we decided that we should turn it over to the sheriff's department. My personal thoughts are that when Mr. Cooper opened the door on the back of that jet, that he was sucked out and fell to a very, very cold death somewhere up in the mountains there.
For an instant, in February 1979, the police and FBI thought they had their man. 35-year-old Robert Wesley Rackstraw, arrested by the police on unrelated charges, was at first connected with the skyjacking. A few days later, law enforcement officers admitted he was completely cleared of the crime.
D.B. Cooper, the haunting name and Gestat face who still remains the '1 mystery of the 70s. On Thanksgiving Eve of 1971, Cooper hijacked a passenger jet from Portland, Oregon, had the plane filled with $200,000 worth of 20s, and then parachuted out the rear door with the money over the rugged mountains of southern Washington state. No trace has ever been found. The question, did he make it? People in southern Washington like to think he did. For 8 years now, many have gotten together to celebrate Cooper's anniversary. This weekend, they'll do it again, out of respect for the man they think beat the system.
Sort of a legend. He's, got away with his skyjacking, and he seemed to be just a simple person. He wasn't a activist of any kind. He just, just people sort of like it.
I believe he thoroughly got away with a whole ball of money, man. He took right off with it, Hard telling where he went from there, but I believe thoroughly that he is alive and he's got the money.
If you were to walk in tonight, what would you do, and you knew it was him?
Probably shake his hand. Buy him a beer.
D.B. Cooper's quite a folk hero in these parts. In fact, if he showed up, most people say they'd love to buy him a beer, which is probably a good idea because he owes more in back taxes to the Internal Revenue Service than he ever made off with on that cold night 8 years ago. From the Ariel Tavern and Store in southern Washington, this is Bill Van Amberg.
A new search began in earnest today for D.B. Cooper, 9 years after the skyjacker parachuted into the Pacific Northwest with over $200,000 in ransom money. The FBI is encouraged by new leads in the long search for Cooper and for the cash.
You have to excuse the bad quality of our audio, but we're way up about 5 miles west of Vancouver along the Columbia River. We are right at the site where the FBI is digging at this moment. Those aren't treasure hunters. Those are FBI agents out here with the shovels. Carl Wickman, our photographer, we can just walk up here and get maybe a little closer look. I think that'll give you a better idea of what's going on.
Got a piece there? Yeah, here's a piece.
There you go, Mike. That's a good 3 feet.
I think it is, huh?
Yeah.
That was right from here.
Oh, yeah.
Bills there that have just deteriorated down.
Pieces. This is the largest piece that we've found so far. It has almost the entire serial number on it, but most of the pieces are very much smaller, about the size of a dime or even smaller.
Are you sure they're the $20 bills from the D.B. Cooper bunch?
Yes, we are, because they're in the same vicinity where the original large quantity of money was found, and we were able to find many, many serial numbers on that money, so we know it's the same.
Let me just ask you one other thing. A lot of this earlier, the larger bills, were found closer to the surface. These later ones down lower. How long ago might it have been that they were buried?
That's only speculation, but we can say that some of this money was found 2 and 3 feet deep in the sand. Without consulting an authority on the river, I would just guess that it would be 4, 5, 6 years.
They're going to be digging up this entire section of beach. Maybe, Carl, if we could just take a look and just show how big it is. It's been a madhouse out here. I think you can see people all over the place. It was a circus earlier on in the day. People didn't know what was going on. The FBI brought the family out this early this morning. They started their digging efforts again, and they've just been going very methodically over this entire section of beach. They have it roped off completely now. We'll be back later on with more details, but the FBI is looking to see if they can find any more of this so-called buried treasure.
This is the man who pulled off the only successful skyjacking in U.S. history. D.B. Cooper hijacked a Northwest Orient Airlines 727 Thanksgiving Eve of 1971. He parachuted out the back door at 8:11 p.m. Hundreds of troops combed the woods near Woodland and east to the town of Ariel. The search for Cooper and his $200,000 went on for weeks, but nobody really knew where he bailed out, where he landed, or even if he survived. The first hard evidence that he jumped out there was found by a hunter in the woods, part of the exit sign from the door of the aircraft. The Cooper mystery and legend have not died with time. The tale still rolls through these hills, and the rumors persist. Did a fisherman really pull a parachute shroud line out of Lake Merwin, then lose it? A 2-man submarine search turned up nothing. Then the Dwayne Ingram family entered the picture last February.
I was going to build a fire, and I had some wood in my arm, and I got ready to set it down, and my son ran up and said, "Wait a minute, Daddy." So he raked a place out in the sand there, and there it was. It kind of tumbled up on the top.
What his young son found was part of Cooper's loot, badly decomposed, in bundles, still in the same order when packed 9 years ago. The beach is 5 miles northwest of Vancouver. The Army Corps of Engineers had dredged the Columbia River here in 1974. The loot had been on the bottom, washed downstream over a 3.5-year period, and now on shore, where FBI agents combed the sand like archaeologists. All they found was $5,800, and no sign of D.B. Cooper. But in the town of Ariel, the people are sure he's still alive.
But a lot of them still think he landed in this area somewhere and made his way towards the Columbia somehow. For all we know, he's been here. You know, walked in, had a beer, and walked out, just to see what the place was like.
The town of Ariel comes alive Saturday with its annual D.B. Cooper party, complete with buffalo stew. They hope this year he'll come out of hiding, if he's still alive, and join in the fun. Brooks Burford, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
This man got on a plane flat broke and got off $200,000 richer.
Are you trying to tell me the only reason you did this thing is for me?
Only you. And the money. Robert Duvall, Treat Williams. I'm famous now. The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper. A true story. No fooling. Rated PG. Starts Friday at a theater near you.
His son, D.B. Cooper, is a skyjacking mastermind behind a daring crime that defied both the elements and the authorities.
The break that leads to the end of the 37-year-old mystery, there's mounting circumstantial evidence. A man who lived for years on the Oregon coast is the infamous hijacker who got away with $200,000.
But before he died, he directly told or hinted to multiple people he was D.B. Cooper.
And he's digging in the sand and finds $5,800.
He knew D.B. Cooper very well, and
There was a short time period when he was talking about it that I realized he was probably talking about himself.
But one fact remains. Nobody knows whether D.B. Cooper is dead or alive.
My name's Larry Carr. I'm the case agent for the D.B. Cooper case out of the FBI's Seattle office. Going to show you some evidence today that was recovered from the D.B. Cooper case in 1971. A parachute, a plane ticket, the tie D.B. Cooper wore. This is D.B. Cooper's ticket. You can see in the name of Dan Cooper. Back in 1971, it cost $18.52 to fly from Portland to Seattle, with $1.48 tax for a total of $20. This is the tie the person known as D.B. Cooper wore the night he jumped. It's a J.C. Penney clip-on tie with the tie clasp. And in 2001, we were able to recover some DNA from the tie. He needed a way to secure the money on his bag. So he cut these lengths of nylon rope from the reserve chute that he opened up on the plane and cinched the top of the bag. And then he took the remaining cords and made a real tight bundle. And then looped some more cords and made basically a handle. You know, you have D.B. Cooper walking down the stairs. As soon as he's standing there, he really can't feel the wind coming around him from the plane going 200 miles an hour. And so when he jumps out of the aircraft, I think he just started tumbling right then, just tumbling, panics. And once you panic, you really can't do anything. So he's falling. He doesn't know where he's at. He can't see. He has no visual reference on the ground. He's out of control in the air and starts to panic, can't pull his chute, and hits the ground with never opening his chute. This is a map that was created back when the early 70s, and it's an outline of what the flight path was, or the believed flight path was, based on information from Air Force. McCord Air Force Base was monitoring the flight early on, and chase planes, and of course the pilot on Cooper's plane himself. But we believe right here is where Cooper bailed out at 10 after 8 to 11 after 8. And then the money was found over here in this area, general area. In 1980, a kid by the name of Brian Ingram, they were on a camping trip with his family along the Columbia River, just northwest of Vancouver. And he's digging in the sand and finds $5,800 in $20 bills in a deteriorated state. And of course, when we ran the serial numbers, looked at the serial numbers, they were D.B. Cooper's money. You know, I hope by going public, people see the evidence. I mean, there's a whole generation out there, maybe two generations now, that have no idea who D.B. Cooper is. And so hopefully by going public, people will be, the case will be reinvigorated. Maybe someone that has some knowledge about it that doesn't even know they have knowledge about it will come forward and provide that one missing piece of the puzzle.
In the early 70s, a hijacker calling himself D.B. Cooper jumped from an airliner in flight, carrying $200,000 in ransom cash, and disappeared in the woods of the Pacific Northwest. His fate remained unknown, his true identity a mystery, that is, perhaps until now, thanks to this exclusive interview with ABC's Pierre Thomas.
I'm certain he was my uncle, Lynn Doyle Cooper.
This woman has reignited the investigation into the only unsolved hijacking in U.S. history. Her name is Marla Cooper, and she says her uncle is the infamous hijacker, D.B. Cooper.
This is not an alias.
No.
You believe that your uncle was D.B. Cooper?
Yes, I do.
The identity of D.B. Cooper has been a mystery since November 24th, 1971, when a man calling himself Dan Cooper hijacked and threatened to blow up a passenger jet flying from Portland to Seattle. He ordered the plane to land and demanded a $200,000 ransom and a parachute. After Cooper's demands were met and the plane took off for Mexico per his request, Cooper did the unthinkable. He lowered the back stairs and jumped out of a speeding 727, thousands of feet over the Pacific Northwest during a raging storm.
The air was freezing. I mean, this was negative, I think -4 degrees at that height. And When he opens the stairs, the blast from the jet engines above, completely deafening.
He disappeared despite a massive manhunt, becoming something of a folk hero, iconic, even the subject of a movie. The one big case where the FBI did not get their man. Marla Cooper says she now remembers a conversation with her father before he died in 1995 that she didn't fully understand at the time.
My father made a comment about his long-lost brother, my uncle LD, and said that he thought he was still alive but hiding from the FBI. And I questioned why he would be hiding. He said, "Don't you remember he hijacked that airplane?" A couple of years ago, my mother made another comment, a similar comment.
Why have you decided to come forward?
Actually, I contacted the FBI as soon as I was sure that what I was remembering were real memories. There's a crime that's taken place that hasn't been solved, and I'm the only person, as far as I know, who knows what happened.
Marla was 8 at the time of the hijacking.
My two uncles, who I only saw at holiday time, were planning something very mischievous. They left to supposedly go turkey hunting, and Thanksgiving morning I was waiting for them to return.
A day later, Northwest Orient Flight 305 was indeed hijacked. Her Uncle LD came home claiming to be in a car accident.
My Uncle LD was wearing a white t-shirt, and he was bloody and bruised and a mess, and I was horrified. I began to cry, and my other uncle, who was with LD, said, "Marla, just shut up and go get your dad."
I definitely think it was strange that he disappeared like that.
Marla's mother, Grace Haley, believes her brother-in-law could be the hijacker.
I think it was more what I didn't know that made me suspicious than what I did know, because anytime the subject would come up, it just immediately got cut back off again.
Haley says LD grew up in Sisters, Oregon, and was familiar with the area where the hijacker jumped. He was a logger, an outdoorsman, tough enough, she believes, to jump out of a plane into the wilderness. Marla doesn't know much about her uncle other than he was a Korean War veteran and that he was obsessed with a comic book character who may have inspired the name of the hijacker.
He had the Dan Cooper comic books thumbtacked to the wall next to his bed. I think he idolized the guy and conjured this crazy scheme in his mind.
She provided the FBI with the guitar strap in this photo to check for fingerprints. So far, no prints have been found. Authorities are investigating this new lead in the case, but whether LD and DB Cooper are one and the same is difficult, if not impossible, to prove. I'm Pierre Thomas for Nightline in Oklahoma City.
Good morning. The man who came to be known as DB Cooper parachuted from a commercial jetliner somewhere between Seattle and Reno, Nevada in 1971. He disappeared with $200,000 in ransom money and was never seen again. Did he get away with it? Did he die trying? It's now safe to say we'll probably never know.
It was just time.
With those words, Frank Montoya Jr. of the FBI Seattle office ended the 45-year hunt for the hijacker known as DB Cooper.
When it occurred in 1971, I was 8 years old. I remember watching Walter Cronkite, and it brought back a lot of memories to see some of the archival footage.
When he got on a plane in Portland, Oregon last night, he was just another passenger who gave his name as D.A. Cooper.
An early wire service report misidentified the passenger as DB Cooper. The name stuck and soon became part of FBI mythology. In November of 1971, Cooper bought a $20 ticket and boarded this Boeing 727. He allegedly showed a flight attendant what he said was a suitcase bomb and forced the plane to land in Seattle.
We gave the information to the authorities, and we just don't want to discuss it any further.
36 passengers were freed when Cooper's ransom demands were met, $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. At Cooper's orders, the plane then took off for Mexico City, apparently with the rear stairwell left open. Authorities say somewhere between Seattle and Reno, Cooper jumped out of the plane with the cash.
How did you surmise that he was not on the plane when he landed in Reno?
Well, a search was made of the plane immediately after landing.
An exhaustive investigation began. In 1980, a boy digging near the Columbia River in Washington found 3 bundles of weathered $20 bills linked to the ransom money, but it only totaled about $6,000.
Sorry, Mrs. Cooper, we're good buddies. Ain't that right, DB?
The case has inspired films, books, and even a song by the 70s group The Byrds called Bag Full of Money. The FBI says over the years, the D.B. Cooper investigation has diverted resources from more pressing cases. But now, that's over.
We would love to have solved this. It doesn't feel good to acknowledge that this is the only unsolved skyjacking in American history.
The case may be closed, but the FBI says it would be willing to take another look if a key piece of evidence, such as D.B. Cooper's parachute, or the rest of that money turns up, but authorities admit after all these years that is highly unlikely.
So what do you think, Don Daler?
I think it's an amazing feat to jump out of a jetliner going, even if they slowed it down. I think only a group of Navy SEALs have ever accomplished that kind of thing. So I think it's probably doubtful that he survived.
But they haven't found the rest of the money or him. I think he pulled it off.
Yeah, Gail's hoping that he's alive and in his 80s somewhere living around.
We are here to unveil the identity of the infamous skyjacker, D.B. Cooper. This is the man who boarded a 727 in Portland on Thanksgiving Eve, 1971. After demanding a $200,000 ransom, he escaped by jumping from 10,000 feet, all without harming a soul. 2.5 years ago, we received a call from Lisa McNeely, one of our editors, about her uncle, Carl Lauren, and his friendship with the real D.B. Cooper. Our Director of Publishing Services and documentary filmmaker, Dirk Wieringa, made the first call to Carl, and for more than an hour and a half, heard a story after story about Carl's late best friend, Walter Rika. That conversation was the start of Principia Media's 2-year investigation into Walter's secret life to prove whether or not he was the real D.B. Cooper. Along the way, we met people who both assisted our investigation and played a key role in Walter's life. Carl Lauren, Walter's best friend, fellow parachutist and confidant. Lisa Story, Walter's niece by his sister Sandy, and someone to whom Walt confessed the skyjacking. And Jeff O'Shaughnessy, the man who interacted with D.B. Cooper immediately following the jump. Also with us is Joe Koenig, a certified fraud examiner and forensic linguist with 45 years of investigative experience. He was brought into the investigation by Vern Jones, the CEO of Principia Media. Vern, please come up and share with us your experience uncovering D.B. Cooper.
It's an honor to be here today. We've held this secret for over 2 years. More importantly, Carl and Loretta have kept this secret for over 20 years. We're really thrilled to be able to finally share this story with somebody. My first conversation with Carl, he kept saying, Vern, you have to come down and just see the evidence. I'm such a skeptic, but he said, you'll believe it, just come down and just see the evidence that I have. So we did stop by, and the first day I met Carl in person was April 1st, 2016. Yes, April Fool's Day. As I explained, I'm so skeptical. When I went to the meeting, I told my wife, Irene, I'll be gone about an hour and a half. Well, when I returned over 4.5 hours later, I still was an extreme skeptic on the Cooper deal, but the overwhelming evidence Carl had on the effects and what Walter did after the hijacking, I thought just that was a really compelling story, even if the other didn't turn out to be true. In May of 2016, filmmaker Dirk Wieringa and I traveled back to see Carl and Loretta at their home. As we were going through Carl's evidence trailer with mounds of papers and things on the wall, I looked over and I saw a plastic storage bag, and inside it there were some audio tapes. And I said, Carl, what are those things? And Carl said, very casually, oh, those are my taped conversations with Walter about the hijacking. For the next few months, our team listened to the more than 3 hours of audio tapes and analyzed them, all dealing with the events that led up to and through the hijacking and even the years beyond. We listened in Walter's own words. We heard him talk about his motivations for the hijacking. We talked about the jump itself, what happened in the plane, where he landed, how he got home, and most importantly, why he wasn't caught. Here's a clip of our documentary that highlights the audio about Walter's story.
Now, where did you carry your note?
Inside pocket of the suit.
What was the note about?
I can't remember right there. This is a hijack and I've got explosives.
So you did hand her the note, and since she kind of put it in her pocket, like she said, I can't believe you're actually hijacking this airplane.
And I says, I can't believe it either, but I'm serious.
Anything on how you told them to get the parachutes and the money in $20 bills and whatnot?
Used $20 bills.
Oh, you wanted all used ones?
Yeah, I didn't get all used ones, but I got a lot of them were used.
How did you order the parachutes? Did you say I want 4 parachutes, or did you order 2 reserves and 2 backpacks?
2 reserves and 2 backpacks.
When that airplane landed in Seattle, it had already been hijacked. You never talked personally, you said, to the cockpit crew.
No, I talked to the stewardess, and the stewardess relayed the message to the cockpit.
And they were always verbal.
Nothing was written.
When you hijacked the airplane and they were flying from Seattle, Tacoma, now you're going to jump, you ordered them to have the gear down.
Right there, well, the wheels down slow the aircraft down right there, and the flaps right there is when we're jumping. Right there, you know, you give it flaps right there, cut power. There's drag right there, so I'm not going to be hit.
Why did you open the one parachute in the airplane?
See that it wasn't tied off.
Was that a reserve or a main?
Was a main.
So now you're down to the one main.
Mm-hmm.
Did you wear a reserve when you did this?
No.
The parachute that you opened in the airplane, you did cut shroud lines off it, you know. What did you do with the shroud lines?
And the money onto me. Took my belt from around my waist, tied it around my raincoat, put the money in there, right there, button it all the way up to my neck.
And then put the parachute on?
Yeah.
In addition to these tapes, we also reviewed letters, passports, newspaper articles, legal documents, and photos, and a typed confession. I've been carefully following the Cooper story since 1971. I'm very aware of all the other people who have come forward with theories and accusations against other people, and I understand your skepticism on this one. I was there. You need to be skeptical. As you will see, none of the theories that we've heard so far, stories, present the overwhelming amount of credible evidence that Carl and our team have put together on this topic, as we now all believe that Walter Rika is the real D.B. Cooper. So that's Walter Rika. The Cooper story that we heard in the tapes and Carl's recollections, they differ significantly from the story that is put out by the FBI. So we're asking you to question a lot of the things that you think you know about the Cooper story. For example, the FBI claimed that D.B. Cooper was an inexperienced parachutist due to the choice of the parachute and his disregard for the weather conditions. Well, we know that Walter performed hundreds of jumps by this time, numerous night jumps while he was up in Alaska, and many winter jumps here in Michigan's climate. We also know that he was a trained paratrooper with the U.S. Army, and then later he was a U.S. Air Force Reserve, and he was in the rescue and survival specialist in that department. Walter knew what he was doing in selecting the chute, and the weather certainly didn't deter him. The FBI claims that D.B. Cooper's flight route took him directly south towards Portland. Well, we know where Walter landed. It was near Cle Elum, Washington, which is almost directly east of Seattle. The FBI claimed that the exact location or drop zone had never really been determined. Well, we know that Walter interacted with Jeff Osadich, a former law enforcement officer, in a cafe within an hour of the time the plane left Seattle. We also know that Walter's friend drove to pick him up, and we know the route that he took to go back to Heartline to Walter's home. The FBI claimed that Cooper most likely died in the jump. This in spite of the fact that there were no missing persons reports filed during that time that matched anywhere remotely the description of Cooper. But we also know that Walter survived. The FBI claimed that Cooper could not have spent the ransom money without being discovered. We know that Walter took much of the money, most of it, and walked across the border into Canada and deposited it into a bank in Canada in a safe deposit box. But in the few months after the hijacking, he also used the money to buy a home on land contract with only a $600 down payment. He bought a car, and he also bought furniture. Now, despite all these differences, the most distinct characteristics of the D.B. Cooper person, they match closely with that of Walter. Walter was a heavy smoker of Raleigh cigarettes. Walter typically drank liquor when he was nervous. He was the same height, same hair color, the same build, and he was wearing the same clothes when Jeff found him, the reported Cooper wearing. Walter was a man with the ability, the opportunity, the desperation, and the fearlessness to pull this off. So the questions come up is, why would the authorities divert attention from the actual flight path where we found Walter? Or why would the FBI interview nearly every parachutist in the entire Northwest, except for the person who had probably the most jumps of anyone at that time in that area? And he was also registered with the United States Parachuting Association as C99, the 99th person to be certified with them. Most importantly, why wasn't he caught? You see, the hijacking was just the beginning of the story. 2 months after the hijacking, Walter was at work, and two men in hard hats came up and said, "You want to have a drink in a local bar after work?" And he agreed to do that. He met him at the bar. They sat down at the table, ordered a drink, and one of the men looked to Walter and said, "One question. Do you want to go to prison?" Walter wisely answered no. The man finally said, "Then you work for us." They stood up and walked out of the bar. After 2 years of training, this man with an 8th grade education, a mediocre welder, a convicted felon on the run, got his first passport under an assumed name and traveled around the world into some of the most volatile countries with passports from the United States, the United Kingdom, and KGB identification, as you see in the cases over here. We believe they had bigger plans for him than simply going to prison. I told you I'm really a skeptic, but with the overwhelming amount of evidence that we have revealed in this book, I am absolutely convinced Walter Rika was the real D.B. Cooper. I'd like to now introduce you to Joe Koenig, an investigator of 45 years experience, to explain to you the task that we assigned to him. Thank you, Vern. The first evidence I looked at was Walt's alleged diary and contact books. I was impressed the entries appeared to be contemporaneous. The entries were made at the time the incidents occurred or appeared that way, with different inks, and the entries were angled, all adding to the document's believability and authenticity. I analyzed the various passports and identification pieces, showing Walter's different aliases. There were a lot of them. The passports showing a good deal of foreign travel, the vaccination records also showing lots of activity. When visiting Carl, I saw more original evidence. Carl's trailer was filled with evidence, photographs and articles posted all around the walls and on his desks and even on the floor. Looked like a movie scene. My next task was to help gather and evaluate evidence, interview witnesses where possible, and try to determine their evidentiary value. On Carl, I evaluated the 3.5 hours of audio tapes to get a fix on his communication patterns, how he enunciated words, his talking rhythm, and whether there were changes in those patterns. I found no changes in patterns. I evaluated all the documents for believability and authenticity. I conducted face-to-face interviews with Carl to better understand his communication patterns and gain information. Loretta, Carl's wife, was present during most of the recordings and discussions between Carl and Walt. I assessed her communication patterns and body language as Carl spoke to me to detect if Loretta agreed with or believed in what Carl was telling me. Loretta consistently showed agreement. On Jeff O'Shaughnessy, a.k.a. Cowboy, I conducted a phone interview with Jeff to get a feel for his speaking rhythms, how he enunciated words, and to get a feel for his communication patterns. I then used that knowledge to conduct a forensic examination of the transcript of Vern's interview with him and a forensic examination of a handwritten statement Jeff had provided us following Vern's taped interview. I compared our documents with respect to Walt. I compared our documents to FBI records and reports to identify consistencies and discrepancies. I found no discrepancies that eliminated Walt as a suspect. Instead, I found amazing consistencies. I evaluated Walter's audio portion in the 3.5 hours of audio tapes to get a fix on his communication patterns, how he enunciated words, his talking rhythm and pace, and whether there were changes in those patterns. I found no changes in pattern. I found it particularly significant that Jeff O'Shaughnessy, a.k.a. Cowboy, his statement of events on the night of 11/24/1971 was identical to Walt's statement that he gave Carl 5 years earlier. In my opinion, Carl, Walt, and Jeff all provided truthful statements. The auto tapes and transcripts, Walt's last testament, provided me with great evidence. My analysis told me Walt was not forced or coerced to make his statements to Carl, that he made the statements freely and voluntarily. The statements and last testament contain Walt's admissions to all the elements of robbery and hijacking, constituting a very good confession that could be used in a criminal proceeding. Based on his confession and all the corroborating evidence, Walt, if still alive, would be prosecuted for the hijacking of Northwest 305. I believe that Walter Rika is D.B. Cooper. And with that, let me introduce Carl.
Evidently, the night that he jumped out of the airplane, I saw him standing on the side of the road. I was going out to play music for a Grange function, which is like out at the Grange Hall. You know, the farmers all have this association called the Grange. And I was out there to play a function for them, play guitar for them. And I saw this man standing on the side of the road, but I couldn't pick him up. I was in a dump truck and I didn't have a seat on the passenger side, and the boss wouldn't let me pick up hitchhikers. So I drove on out to this little, it's called a Tianaway Junction. It's what it is. It's a little mom and pop type restaurant with some gas pumps, and it's the intersection between 97 and Highway 10. And I'm sitting there drinking coffee, and this man walks in. He's soaking wet, got black slick back hair, a black suit, white shirt, no tie, black pants, you know, I mean, just a whole suit, black penny loafers. And he comes up to me and he says, "Kid," he says, "where am I?" I said, "Well, you're about 4 miles east of Cle Elum." He said, "If I make a phone call," he says, "could you give this friend of mine directions how to get here to pick me up?" I said, "Sure, no problem." So he went over, he dialed a number, handed me the phone. I'd asked his friend, I said, "You coming up over Snoqualmie Pass? You're going to be coming up over Blewett? You know, I need to know which way you're coming." He told me which way he's going to come, and I said, "Okay, you'll be here in about an hour and a half, as your friend will be here waiting for you." So I handed him back the phone. I went back to the counter drinking my coffee, and then he came over and sat down alongside of me, and he says, "Well, thanks for your help, kid." I says, "Your friend will be here about an hour and a half." I says, "I've got to go play country music out of here at a Grange function." And he said, "Well, don't worry about your coffee, kid." He says, "I'll take care of it." Shook hands with the man. I got out and got in the truck, and I left.
We went out, and Carl found Cowboy, which was crazy, you know, that he could track this guy down, but it was only because Walt gave such a vivid description. I mean, you know, cowboy attire, a cowboy hat, a guitar next to him, and then drove away in a dump truck. I mean, come on, who does that, right? That was pretty good. And so then when Carl went out there, he's like, who at that time played music? Because the guy said he had a gig to play that night at the Grange Hall. So we run down, we found the band leader at the Grange Hall. Yes, I had Jeff sub for me I was really sick on one Thanksgiving. I don't know what year it was, and Jeff said that was the year that it was crazy. So when I found Cowboy and we went out and interviewed him, at that time I was really skeptical still. It's like, yeah, this guy is it. And Jeff is so believable.
Well, I heard the plane was hijacked the next day, but I didn't put two and two together because the composite drawing that I saw on TV, the guy looked like he jumped out of a spaceship, you know, 2 point of a jaw, you know, had those glasses on, looked nothing like the man that I was talking to. And they had him jumping out, or someplace around Oregon is where they had him. So there was no reason for me to try to put two and two together to find him where I was.
It was really hard to say, wow, I don't believe this. When Jeff mirrored what Walter said, it was really creepy at that time. It was just kind of
Grand Rapids-based publisher claiming that their latest work finally reveals the true identity of D.B. Cooper, the man who hijacked a jetliner, collected a ransom, and then jumped into oblivion 47 years ago. They say that he's a man from Michigan. The book and video, D.B. Cooper and Me, tells the story of how Walt Rika from the east side of the state eventually confessed to being Cooper. 24-Hour News 8's Joe LaVergie talked with those connected to this story.
Ryan Rika died in 2014, but not before allegedly telling family and his best friend how he pulled it off. If anyone could pull off the legendary crime D.B. Cooper is accused of pulling off on November 25th, 1975, it was Walt Rika.
My best friend Walter was a daredevil. He was determined. He was fearless. He was tough as nails. And
Colonel Charlie Lauren had long suspected his friend of committing the crime, along with being a tough guy who sometimes got on the wrong side of the law. Lauren says Rika was an expert parachutist and had the wherewithal to pull off the crime. After 37 years of dancing around the subject, Lauren finally got a confession.
He called me up, a phone call, 2008 of November, and he said, "Charlie, I am D.B. Cooper."
Lauren claims to have the confession in Rika's own words as well, a recording of a conversation he claims he had with Rika about what he said to a stewardess on the hijacked plane.
She said, "I can't believe you're actually hijacking this airplane." And I said, "I can't
Family members also claim Rika confessed. His niece recalls finding a written confession before Rika died.
And I asked him, is this true? And he said yes. And we talked about it, and I told him, don't sign this.
The revelations come some 2 years after the FBI dropped an investigation that lasted 45 years. The Bureau suggesting Cooper may not have survived the jump. So if the book is right, somehow Rika, who died in 2014, got away with it.
I doubted it for over a year into our investigation, and finally, the overwhelming evidence just really did convince me.
800 potential suspects were identified. All but a few dozen were eliminated. So how'd they miss Rika? Well, here's where the story takes yet another wild turn. According to Jones, Rika, sometimes criminal, sometimes globe-trotting rogue adventurer, eventually ended up working for a group tied to the CIA. Jones claims Rika's specialty was assassinations. He believes the FBI ignored evidence they may have collected against Rika for the hijacking because of his CIA ties.
We have pretty strong evidence that the FBI went out of their way to not let Walter go to jail.
Well, there's several other pieces of information in the book that that back up the claims. Book signing is set for tonight at Schuler Books on 28th Street.
Yeah, still draws a lot of fascination. I believe it's the only skyjacking never solved.
Yeah, at least in the U.S., yeah. Yeah, and boy, somebody got away with it.
It's so interesting to think about, yeah. Thank you, Jeff.
Finally, it's
Thanks,
one of the
Jeff.
most notorious unsolved crimes in U.S. history, the 1971 D.B. Cooper hijacking, when a man jumped out of a plane with a parachute and a bag of ransom money and vanished. Now, 45 years later, the FBI is closing the case because of a lack of credible leads. Our Cynthia McFadden has more on the mystery still baffling investigators.
45 years ago, D.B. Cooper bailed out of a 727 with $200,000 strapped to his chest. It led to hundreds of news reports.
He parachuted out of the plane. It landed in Reno, and he hasn't been seen since.
Inspiring a 1981 movie and dozens of armchair detectives. What the case has not had is a resolution. Despite the FBI's pursuing thousands of leads and nearly as many suspects, the hijacker's true identity was never uncovered. And now he's not likely to be. The FBI officially ending what it called one of its longest and most exhaustive investigations. It was the day before Thanksgiving in 1971. A man in a suit and tie identified himself as Dan Cooper. He passed a note to a flight attendant claiming he had a bomb. The plane landed in Seattle, where he exchanged the passengers for that $200,000 and 4 parachutes.
You saw the exchange of money? We saw them bring the money aboard.
He then demanded to be flown to Mexico. 45 minutes later, the rear door opened and he jumped 10,000 feet into a rainstorm, hurling himself into history as the perpetrator of America's only unsolved hijacking.
He was not nervous. He seemed rather nice, and other than he wanted certain things to be done.
Ralph Himmelsbach was the FBI's point man on the case for years.
I think of him as being just another sleazy, rotten criminal.
But the one who got away. Cynthia McFadden, NBC News, New York.
It is a 47-year-old mystery. Who is D.B. Cooper? Cooper hijacked a plane and jumped out into the Pacific Northwest with a parachute and $200,000 in ransom. Well, this week, a friend who says D.B. Cooper confessed to him and a team of investigators who came together to write about this theory finally named the man they say is behind the mystery. And while you're watching this story, let us know if you buy in at WKYC.com/vote now.
I believe that Walter Rika is D.B. Cooper.
If the latest theory is true, then this
is a hijacker. I've got explosives.
is the voice of D.B. Cooper.
And I says, I can't believe it neither, but I'm serious.
Or as Carl Lauren knew him, Walter Rika.
When he died, we were best friends.
Lauren, who lives in Michigan, believes Rika was the notorious skyjacker. On November 24th, 1971, Cooper, perhaps Rika, hijacked a flight from Portland to Seattle. He gave a flight attendant a note that read, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase." Cooper exchanged the passengers for $200,000 in cash and parachutes.
2 reserves and 2 backpacks.
Then jumped out of the plane over the Oregon-Washington line. After joking about it for years, Lauren says in 2008, Rika called him and confessed in this taped conversation.
And he said, I am D.B. Cooper.
You never talked personally, you said, to the cockpit crew.
No, I talked to the stewardess, and the stewardess relayed the message to the cockpit.
Lauren and others launched a secret 2-year-long investigation into Rika's claim. They published their findings in a new book. At a news conference in Michigan, the publisher introduced part of the team, including private investigator Joe Koenig.
Walt, if still alive, would be prosecuted for the hijacking of Northwest 305.
And then there's Jeff O'Shaughnessy. He claims to have run into Rika at a Washington restaurant within an hour of his jump.
I thought, you know, this guy's got to be a French fry short of a Happy Meal. It's snowing and raining out there, it's cold, and he's got his coat rolled up under his arm.
Perhaps it was all part of the plan.
Took my belt from around my waist, tied it around my raincoat, put the money in there, right there, button it all the way up to my neck.
And then put the parachute on.
Yeah.
I'm Brandon Simmons, Channel 3 News.
It's going up right there. 78% of you now saying, no, you do not buy into this new theory.